The Scottish Enlightenment, the Scots Invention of the Modern World by Arthur Herman. Chapter 8, Section 2. Adam Smith was born in Kirkcaldy, just across the Firth of Forth from Edinburgh in 1723. His father, Adam Smith Sr., was trained in the law and served as a customs inspector in Kirkcaldy. It was not a cushy job. One of the unforeseen results of the Treaty of Union had been a huge increase in smuggling along Scotland's coasts. His father's frustrations in trying to intercept the operations of local smugglers, most of whom were otherwise law-abiding citizens and merchants, were an early lesson for the younger Adam Smith in how human ingenuity will find a way to defy government rules and regulations, such as customs tariff, when they fly in the face of self-interest. Here is how Smith could put it in his Wealth of Nations, almost 50 years later, quote, "The natural effort of every individual to better his own condition is so powerful a principle that it's alone and without any assistance, not only capable of carrying on the society to wealth and prosperity, but of surmounting 100 impertinent obstructions with which the folly of human laws too often encumbers its operations." End quote. Words that have made every socialist and every liberal of altruistic Hutchinson mode gnashed his teeth. But the truth is that it was Adam Smith who snatched Hutchinson from the burning embers to which the skeptic David Hume had consigned him, and who tried to find a way to keep the idea that human beings have an inborn moral sense and a natural regard for others, alive as a basic principle of human nature. We usually think of Adam Smith as an economist and the founder of the study of political economy, or the dismal science. And there certainly are pages of Wealth of Nations that are dismal. But Adam Smith thought of himself primarily as a moral philosopher, and almost all his studies came down to answering the basic questions Hutchinson had raised. Why are human beings on average good rather than bad? Why do they choose, on the whole, to lead constructive lives, getting up in the morning to go to work and raise a family and build relationships with other human beings, instead of, on the whole, murdering and plundering them? The answers Smith came up with were different from Hutchinson's, because by now he had to confront the challenge of Lord Camp's cynical realism and that of his disciple David Hume. In many ways, Smith is the fusion of the two sides of the Enlightenment, the soft side represented by Hutchinson, which is a belief in man's innate goodness, is a faith in the power of education to enlighten and liberate, and is an appeal to nature, and the hard side represented by Keynes and Hume, which is a cool, skeptical distrust of human intentions and motives. A fusion, but also a tension, runs all through Smith's work, a tension that is never fully resolved. It is the tension that runs through all of modern life and culture, in fact. A tension between what human beings ought to be and occasionally are, and what they really are and generally remain. Smith's great achievement was to have the courage to confront that tension head on, to describe it and analyze it, and then leave it to others in the future to understand it in their own way. It is this, not his role as the supposed high priest of capitalism, that has made him one of the great modern thinkers and makes him still important to us today. Adam Smith was a man of thought and contemplation rather than action. He almost became a minister, although he was never ordained. He should have been a lawyer like his father, but when he went to the University of Glasgow in 1737, he fell instead under the spell of Francis Hutcheson. At Glasgow, Smith observed the twin traditions of Scottish learning, the study of natural and civil law, and afterwards wrote brilliant and influential lectures on both. In every respect, his education was Scottish. All the leading influences on his thought were entirely Scottish-based. Although he did go to England to study at Oxford 7 years, he found nothing of value there. He summed up his experience there in his description of the average university as a sanctuary in which exploded systems and obsolete prejudices find shelter and protection after they have been hunted out of every other corners of the world. End quote. Yet Smith did not hesitate to use Scottish universities as a base for his work and activities. His public lectures in Edinburgh in 1750 and 1751 earned him enough of a reputation to bring him back to Glasgow as a professor of logic, and then as a Hutcheson's successor to the chair of moral philosophy. At first, Smith tried to emulate the informal, animated lecture style of his great teacher, but he soon gave up and resigned himself to reading his notes aloud from his desk. What drew students was not Smith's style, but the substance of his lectures, which were nothing less than an attempt to fulfill the great project Hutcheson had envisioned decades before, of creating a science of human behavior as coherent and irrefutable as the physical science of Isaac Newton. It would begin with a natural history of man as a political agent and end with the general principles of municipal law, political economy, and the law of nations. This would have been a daunting task in any case, but by 1755 it was even more so, because now Smith, like everyone else, had to work under the shadow of David Hume. If Adam Smith is the first great modern economist, then David Hume is modernity's first great philosopher. His literary, unorthodox views made him a legend in his own time. One day, after he had bought his house in Edinburgh's new town, he was going home by taking a shortcut across the deep bog left by the draining of the North Loch. As he walked along the treacherous and narrow path, he slipped and fell into the bog. Unable to extract it himself, he began calling for help as darkness started to fall. An old woman, an Edinburgh fishwife, stopped, but when she looked down and recognized him as David Hume, the atheist, he refused to help him up. Hume pleaded with her and asked her if her religion did not teach her to do good, even to her enemies. Quote, "That may well be," she replied, "but ye shall not get out of that till ye become a Christian yourself." and repeated the Lord's Prayer and the belief. To her amazement, Hume proceeded to do just that, whereupon, true to her word, the old lady reached down and pulled him up. The story reveals a great deal about Hume the man, his self-deprecating sense of humor. The story comes out of one of Hume's letters. His keen awareness of the clash of cultures in the meeting between the philosopher and the fishwife, but above all his awareness, even relish of his status as an outsider, even within his own country and city. It was not just Hume's religious views that made him the outsider and the renegade. However, for more than 2,000 years, Western philosophers had praised the primacy of reasons as the guide to all human action and virtue. Plato, Aristotle, Augustine, Aquinas, Descartes, Locke, Hobbes, and even Hutcheson could all agree with that great time-honored consensus that the job of reason was to master our emotion and appetites. With one earth-shaking look, his first, Hume reversed this. Reason is, he wrote, and ought to be the slave of the passions. That ought to be stood 2,000 years of philosophy on its head. Hume quietly pointed out that human beings are not and never have been governed by their rational capacities. Reason's role is purely instrumental. It teaches us how to get what we want. What we want is determined by our emotions, our passions, angers, lust, fear, grief, envy, but also joy, love of fame, love of contentedness, and paradoxically, our desire to live according to the rational principles, or in the last case, to recognize the dictates of necessity and act accordingly. It is not a reason, however, that teaches us this, but a habit, a frame of mind that associates certain effects with certain causes or actions. We are, in the end, creatures of habit and of the physical and the social environment within which our emotions and passions must operate. We learn to avoid the passion that destroy, that pursue the ones that succeed in order to get what we consider our just deserts and gratify our self-interest. A treatise of human nature appeared in 1734 when Hume was only 26, yet it retained the seeds of almost everything he would write for the next 40 years, and the seeds of a new philosophic outlook for the West. Other thinkers, of course, had recognized the importance of self-interest in human affairs. Lord Keynes, as founder of the Civil Society School, had stressed its paramount role in the creation and formation of all social ties. But Hume carried this to a new level. For Hume, self-interest is all there is. The overriding guiding force in all our actions is not our reason or our sense of obligation toward others or any innate moral sense. All these are simply formed out of a habit and experience. But the most basic human passion of all, the desire for self-gratification, it is the one thing human beings have in common. It is also the necessary starting point of any system of morality and of any system of government. If Hume had made a dog's breakfast of Hutcheson's moral theories, Hutcheson was horrified when he first read the treatise and did what he could do to prevent Hume from getting a university appointment. He gave a similar disturbing twist to the question Lord Keynes had started out with. Why does society exist? He agreed with his mentor that it was there to protect property. But Hume also pointed out that we are surrounded by a seething, crawling cesspool of passions, our own as well as those of others. Left to ourselves, with no external constraints, the result would be a murderous chaos. Hume certainly saw Hobbes' view of a man's natural depraved state as more realistic than Hutchinson's moral exalted vision. Yet no society, even the best organized, can possibly please each and every afterbreak of self-gratification at the expense of others. There are not enough minutes in the day. Any appeal to reason is hopeless, since reason is and ought to be the slave of the passions, and the passions are the roots of the problem. So, in order to survive, Hume concluded, society has to devise strategies to channel our passions in constructive directions. Through social rules and conventions and customs, internalized by its members and made into regular habits, it turns that might be socially destructive impulses into socially useful ones. The passion of lust becomes licit within the confines of a marriage, which not only prevents social discord, but actually helps to propagate the society's members. Anger and bloodlust are rightly condemned as socially disruptive, that is, unless they are unleashed on the battlefield against society's enemies. The passion of avidity could, if left without limits, destroy all social bonds, as each member of a society robs and plunders his neighbors and is plundered in return. However, canalizing that desire and pushing it in a constructive direction makes it work to the benefit of a society. Instead of robbing a bank, why not open one? One can make more money with less work and stress and help one's neighbors at the same time. In short, the passion of avidity becomes socialized, refined, as Williams Robertson might say, and generates a sense of property. We can have what we want when we wanted, society tells us, just as long as we do not take it at the expense of the rights of others. This section is kind of long, so let's stop here.